Good morning and welcome. My name is Teresa Scott and I'm the Board President of NAPCAN, the National Association for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. I'm coming to you today from beautiful Cubby Cubby Land on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. I would like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within our community. It is also really important to acknowledge the children because that's what this week is all about, and that's where culture will live on. It is my honour to welcome you to this webinar, which will officially launch National Child Protection Week 2021. While we can't be together in a room this year, it is wonderful to be able to share this launch via live stream with so many of you. Over National Child Protection Week, we will be delivering an incredible lineup of experts and key thinkers across Australia who are going to share their knowledge and expertise to inspire us to become more effective in improving outcomes for children. As always in National Child Protection Week, we hope to encourage as many new conversations as possible about how we can collectively bring about the change needed to achieve a fairer, safer Australian for every child. We are so fortunate to have the Governor-General with us today. His Excellency is NAPCAN's patron, a wonderful supporter of National Child Protection Week, and of course, a strong advocate for Australia's children all year round. On that note, I would like to invite His Excellency, the Governor-General of Australia, the Honourable David Hurley, to formally launch this year's National Child Protection Week campaign.
Very warm welcome, and Linda and I, and Linda's off camera here, are delighted to be here this morning to be part of the launch of National Child Protection Week this year. We here at Government House are on the land of the Ngunnawal people, and if you know Canberra, you'll know this is a beautiful part of Australia, and we do thank them for looking after it for us for generation after generation. Could I acknowledge Ms Anne Hollonds, the National Children's Commissioner, of course Teresa Scott, the Board President of NAPCAN, the supporters, advocates, ladies and gentlemen, all who have joined us this morning. Linda and I are pleased to be able to join you for this important event on our national calendar, the launch of the National Child Protection Week 2021 here in Australia. Data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare informs us that the number of children receiving child protection services from 2016-17 to 2019-20 increased by 38%. That substantial investigations remained at 9 per 1,000 children, and care and protection services at 11 per 1,000. Approximately 175,000 Australian children received services in 2019-20. Now, these statistics will not surprise anyone in today's audience, but they do remind us of why we are here. The public is rightly concerned with the current increased risk to our children, especially the potential risks to educational outcomes and mental health. Linda and I share that concern. Over the past 3 weeks, we have held a series of virtual meetings with representatives from the mental health sector, the national secondary education sector, the national early childhood sector, and recently with the National Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollonds. We have found these meetings to be extremely beneficial. They've allowed us to gain a first-hand account of what's happening on the ground, and including the chance to speak with those on the front lines who are assisting those in need. Child protection has the aim of intervening in a family setting that is placing a child at risk of experiencing neglect or one or more of a set of defined abuses. Child protection removes children from harm or potential harm, which in itself is an absolute necessity, but it also does so to create opportunity. In that context, this year's theme for National Child Protection Week is particularly apt. Every child in every community needs a fair go. Every child needs to be able to grasp the opportunities that life provides. I often remark that creating opportunities for people is not about opening doors for them, but showing them how many doors are available to them and the pathways to those doors. I believe that an essential part of your work must be to illuminate the possibilities that exist for each and every child. Prevention is a major factor in child protection and critical to creating opportunity. Primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention strategies are difficult to implement under normal circumstances. Add the risk of unemployment, confinement at home, financial loss, fatigue, and anxiety to the normal causes of child abuse, then we have conditions that should and do greatly concern us. Addressing those conditions are, of course, the highest priority at present, but in doing so, please bear in mind what I consider to be that other most important purpose, creating opportunity. Your conference theme has two elements: that all is not well for some children, and that we need to develop and implement actions to address the risks they face. To achieve the latter is why we're all here today. And it's why I'm particularly pleased that I accepted the patronage of the National Association for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. From my recent conversations, I'm assured that the risk of our children is well understood, and that there is the will and enormous energy to provide outcomes. Mitigating the risk to our children will require policy that is child-centric, or indeed children's policy, policy for children, and the application of appropriate resources. You do not need my urging to lead on this matter, but I'm confident that you'll do so. Changing the course of one life in our life is a very powerful motivator for action. The National Child Protection Week is about changing the lives for many. Now, I'm an optimist by nature. I believe in the best of people, and I have been repeatedly, or have seen repeatedly, the best in Australians. Linda and I could talk to you all day and all night about the richness of spirit that exists in communities all around our country, and we've seen the Australian willingness to take on big issues and to succeed. You are all examples of that richness of spirit and aspiration, and that gives me confidence. In 2021, National Child Protection Week comes at a critical juncture. It provides an opportunity to raise awareness and to remind us all that the welfare and safety of our children is a joint responsibility, indeed a national joint responsibility. This week is about turning a general agreement with a theme that all children deserve a fair go into action. Action at individual, community, and national level to protect the welfare of our children. I commend all those already working hard every day, the workers and volunteers all around the country who help create communities that support families and children. To all of you who work tirelessly in the interests of our children, on behalf of all Australians, I say thank you. We as a nation take great heart from the commitment, passion, and expertise that this group and many thousands of others bring to the table. Your efforts, leadership, and compassion are inspirational. And on that note, it is now my pleasure to launch National Child Protection Week for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this year's theme and for your encouragement to the Australian community to take action to care and protect our children and young people and to keep them safe from harm. So thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce the National Children's Commissioner, Miss Anne Hollonds. Anne's role is vital in ensuring that children's rights are protected and their voices heard. Thank you, Anne, and welcome to our webinar.
Thank you for the very warm welcome, Teresa, and those inspiring words, Governor-General. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where everyone's joining from today, including the Camaragal people of the Aurora Nations where I am today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'd like to acknowledge His Excellency, the Honourable David Hurley, our Governor-General, and Her Excellency, Mrs Hurley, and Ms Teresa Scott, NAPCAN Board President. Nelson Mandela said, "History will judge us by the difference we make in the lives every day of children." Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts at the beginning of Child Protection Week, a week where we shine a light on the harsh realities of the lives of many children in this country. And we also invite our citizens to stand up and be counted for making sure that all children everywhere are safe and well. By improving our policy and service systems, we can create the conditions that empower families to raise their children to be safe and well. Protecting children is everyone's responsibility, and when we do this together, we can give every child in every community a fair go. Today, I'll share a few of the things that keep me awake at night as National Children's Commissioner. Even before COVID, we had a long-standing crisis in Australia with far too many children missing out on the basics for their health development and well-being. This is because our service systems are not well coordinated and the coverage is patchy across the country. It's a bit of a lottery as to what support is available depending on where you were born, with basics like housing and income security out of reach for many. COVID has amplified these problems, and many children and their families are doing it tough right now. For example, I've been shocked at how many young mothers under 21 years or so I've met around Australia who are homeless, having escaped violent relationships, and are now couch surfing or living in short-term refuges or caravan parks with their babies and toddlers. The lack of affordable housing right across the country is making it very hard for these young people, who are also parents, to be able to keep themselves and their children safe and well. We know that on child wellbeing, Australia is ranked at 32nd out of 40 OECD countries. And we're only the 30th out of 38 countries on educational equality, with a widening gap in reading skills. 20% of Australian children experience significant vulnerabilities and adversity, with immediate and lifelong consequences that can go on for generations. On mental health, the numbers have continued to worsen. Suicide has been the leading cause of death for children and young people aged 5 to 17 for many years, with Indigenous children disproportionately affected. According to the AIHW, every single day, on average, 30 children are removed from their own families and placed in out-of-home care, with poor lifelong consequences across future generations. While there's been some progress on some closing the gap targets, the target to reduce the rates of First Nations children removed from their families is not on track. In 2020, the rate of child removal actually increased and is now 11 times more than for non-Indigenous children. In Australia, we're still incarcerating children as young as 10 years of age, mostly First Nations children, and sometimes for small property crimes like stealing food because they're hungry. These children in youth detention centres are children living with serious disadvantages, and many have developmental and cognitive disabilities. If child protection simply required removing children from their families, we would have fixed the problems by now. Because over the years in Australia, we've removed a lot of children and the numbers are still growing, and yet things are not getting better. So you have to ask, where is this going to end? How bad does it have to get before we act on the underlying issues, not just the symptoms? The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child says children should only be separated from their families as a last resort. This is not just a human rights issue and a human tragedy, it's also an economic problem. The costs of not acting early to prevent child abuse and neglect are astonishing. In 2019, it was estimated that it costs over $15 billion annually for late reaction policy, including child protection, youth crime, unemployment, homelessness, mental health, and domestic violence. The term child maltreatment is used for physical, sexual, emotional abuse and neglect and exposure to domestic violence. Research has shown that these experiences in childhood are a major cause of serious mental ill health and psychological trauma in adulthood. The Australian Bureau of Statistics recently released a report showing that women who experienced childhood sexual abuse are 3 times more likely to experience sexual assault in later life. And for men, the risk is 5 times greater. So research shows that the different kinds of child maltreatment are preventable risk factors for serious problems in adult life. Preventable. If we needed any other reasons to protect children, we know it is also good economic sense to create the conditions that enable children to thrive, because we all benefit. Much of what we do currently in policy is trying to address the symptoms, not the root causes such as poverty, discrimination, and disadvantage. We need to invest in upstream policy reform in order to reduce the substantial human and economic costs of not ensuring that children are growing up safe and well. But despite decades of mounting evidence of the human and economic value of investing in prevention and early intervention, and in creating the conditions to support children and their families, we've been unable to shift investment upstream. Right now, we're still continuing to pay more for expensive late reaction policies. These are ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. I've spent the past few months speaking with kids and their families across Australia to find out what they think is working well and what they think needs to change in order for families to be able to keep their children safe and well. These consultations are for the implementation plan for the new national framework for protecting Australia's children. Last year, the Community Services Ministers all agreed that children and young people's views should be heard in the development of the new plan, and I see this as a positive signal of change. We know that hearing the expertise and insights of kids and their families in an ongoing way will help us to understand their experiences and design better policies to help them. It's also Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Some of the early emerging themes that I've heard about are the fact that the complex issues and multi-layered problems faced by kids and families are made worse by the complex and siloed service systems that they have to do battle with. There are many barriers, and it's hard for kids and their families to find the help they need. I heard a lot about violence at home, in the neighbourhoods, on the streets, and at school. Sadly, I heard from many kids who do not feel safe at home. And as I mentioned earlier, the lack of affordable and secure housing is a problem. It seems to have become worse with rising rental prices around the country because of COVID. How can we even get to the first step of protecting young mothers and their children who've experienced family violence if they have nowhere to live? Access to services such as mental health was an issue, and lack of adequate public transport to even get to services. Schools and the education systems are seen as critically important and often not able to support kids who are struggling, and they end up missing out or dropping out. And there was a lot of recognition from kids and families that teachers need more support, but also that we may need to think about redesigning the way schools are run so that they're more open to the inclusion of families and are a better fit for local community needs. Children and young people spoke about often experiencing judgment and discrimination in the service systems that are meant to help them. And they said that they need to be able to trust the service provider and to know that they will be treated fairly and with respect. A lack of safety and well-being is a symptom of these underlying broken systems which are failing to support children and their families. Being serious about child protection requires us to get serious about fixing the fragmentation and broken systems so that we can stop children falling in the cracks. We need to target prevention, not just late reaction. When COVID arrived, the existing fragmentation of services was amplified, revealing many challenges. During COVID lockdowns, schools have been closed, as we know, for extended periods, and this has presented significant challenges for families. And many are worried about a shadow pandemic of child abuse and domestic violence because kids are invisible when schools are closed. I've received many reports that children, even including at younger ages, are now more distressed, experiencing more complex mental health difficulties, and that we're seeing increased rates of self-harm, suicide ideation, eating disorders, as well as admissions to emergency departments. Many children are struggling with their families under stress, and there may be insufficient support for their development and learning at home in these unprecedented circumstances, and many children will face challenges in months to come. There's a growing realisation that while schools are critical for development and learning, schools are also community hubs for child and family support. And schools are social learning environments that can't be replaced by Zoom. Childhood is a uniquely important time for cognitive, social, and emotional development, laying down the foundations for academic learning, work readiness, and success in later life. Children have unique needs which are not always addressed by policy focused on adults' issues. So we need to act to ensure that children's needs are more visible during the pandemic so that we can protect them. This year, Child Protection Week coincides with the National Women's Safety Summit. This provides an opportunity to highlight that children in their own right are victims of violence and that we need to get serious about preventing violence in childhood. Of the many women who experience family and domestic violence, more than 50% have children in their care, and often it's the children who are removed from their families with lifelong negative consequences for relationships, development, and well-being. Preventing violence in childhood is not only a human rights issue for children, it prevents violence and other major problems in adult life. So children must be visible in our national plan to stop domestic and family violence. We have all lived through very challenging times in the past 18 months, which have been game-changing in how we think as a country about social and economic policy and the role of government. For example, struggling businesses have been given extra financial help, as have individuals who have lost their jobs. And there's been big expansion in mental health services in recognition that mental health is an important everyday issue for us all. Our road to recovery from the COVID pandemic now requires close attention to the needs of younger Australians and their families, especially those children who have missed out on critical support during COVID. We need a COVID recovery plan for children to ensure we understand what children and their families need to build resilience for the post-COVID decade. A COVID recovery plan for children and their families would enable investment to be better targeted, preventing longer-term problems and reducing costs down the road. COVID has taught us that big problems require national leadership and coordination. There's growing public momentum for a significant step up to address the development and well-being of children from the earliest years as the core of a new nation-building strategy. Overall, we need to better understand how our systems are failing our children and families, and how we and our current ways of operating are actually supporting the conditions that keep things the same. What is our promise to Australian children? Imagine a baby who's born this year. When that child turns 10 years of age, will we be able to say to her, we did everything we could to give you the best start in life? Because in Australia, children are our national priority. Child abuse and its lifelong negative consequences are preventable. We need to ask our governments to act on our values to ensure that the uniqueness of childhood is respected, that children are valued and respected, and that we make sure their families get the support they need to raise children to be safe and well. As citizens, we need to hold our governments accountable for making children and young people a national priority. We should be able to make this promise to all our children. Children do well when their families do well. When families struggle, children struggle too. I believe Australians really care about kids. We want all children to have the best start in life. We want to be able to say, hand on heart, Australia is the best place to raise a child, the best place to grow up. So when we hear about child abuse and neglect, or about children living with violence, we feel uncomfortable. We want it to be fixed. And I believe this is doable. Child protection is an individual and shared responsibility. Child protection is about making sure we have the conditions and policies in place to empower parents to be able to raise their children well and safe. Child protection is about acting early to provide help before things get worse and it becomes a crisis. Continuing to tolerate our chronic state of crisis in child safety and well-being and not making children a national priority, well, that's a choice we make. This Child Protection Week, let's commit to stand up for real change for the safety and well-being of all our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for those inspiring words. You beautifully illustrated the incredible amount of work that still needs to be done to support children in Australia, and the important need for investment in primary prevention. I think everything that you've said echoes what the whole theme of this year's Child Protection Week theme is, that every child in every community needs a fair go, and we need to be examining what does that look like in our community. So thank you, Anne, and also thank you to the online audience joining us today. And I hope that you will go to NAPCAN's website to register for any upcoming webinars this week. And I will leave you with a final message. As we heard from our two speakers this morning, to treat all Australian children fairly, we need to make sure that every neighbourhood in the country has the resources that children need to thrive and be healthy. And unfortunately, that is not the case in Australia today. Therefore, throughout National Child Protection Week, we are calling for everyone to play their part, large or small, to help every child in every community have a fair go by ensuring access to safe places to live, play, and learn. So thank you once again for joining us this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.